Hello everyone, Katarina here. Welcome to the Christmas card number 9 in this year's Christmas card series. This is the card I'm making today. It's a layered watercolor poinsettia bouquet. This is very simple to make. Actually, I got this idea after I failed painting the poinsettia as a flat layer, as a one single piece. I was struggling painting the greenery and other foliage, and this was my workaround. These are the products I used for this project. They are nothing special, just use whatever you already have or can afford. I have here the Canson XL graduated watercolor cardstock. I also have here another plain white cardstock. It's from House of Card and Paper. It's 250 grams. Nina Solar White 80 pounds should work too. Since this year I decided to make all of my cards from scratch with watercolors, I have here the Cotman watercolor paints from Winsor & Newton. I have the normal palette and I also have metallic watercolors. Of course, I have some brushes and I also will be using black fine liners. A lot of these products are optional or can be substituted for something else. For example, you don't have to use watercolors. You can substitute it for another medium you feel more comfortable using. So that's the supplies. Now let's start painting the poinsettia. I started with the top layer of the poinsettia. I painted 5 petals, or actually all of these are leaves. The first section is about 7 centimeters in diameter. I made a few cards after this one, and there I started with drawing a circle. I drew it with a compass and it really helped. I didn't want it to be too big as I needed it to fit A6 card. And drawing the circle first makes sure that I paint the size I want. After I was done with the top set of leaves, I started painting individual leaves, both red and green. I filled a whole sheet of watercolor paper. As I mentioned, I made a few of these cards, and painting these all at once is a time saver. You don't want to paint them too big, about 4.5, max 5 centimeters long. The smaller petals were about 3.5 centimeters long. I painted some of these leaves a little too big or too long, and that's how I learned. You can still use them, but it's better when they are a little bit smaller. So I filled the whole page with the leaves, and next I came back to the top poinsettia and added a second coat of the paint. You can do a flat wash, but I was adding the paint at the bottom of the petal, and then with a clean damp brush I spread it towards the top. This is to create a little bit more depth. And I did the same thing on the individual leaves as well. I will speed this up and show you some of the painting. I hope it's clear what I'm doing here. If not, just ask in the comments. The painting of the leaves is done. Now let's add some details. I was going to add the details with watercolors, which you can still do, or skip it completely, but I decided to add the details using black fine liners. I used 2 because I have a pack with different sizes, otherwise I would be just using 1. I think I used 8mm for the outside and 3 mm for the inside. I wasn't trying to be careful with drawing of the lines, especially for the outline. I didn't want it necessarily to be messy, but I didn't want to follow the watercolor shape exactly. So if there were some white gaps or I went inside of the shape, that was completely okay. That's exactly what I wanted. And after I drew the lines on the top set of leaves, I did the same on the rest of the individual leaves. This was actually inspired by the Instagram account dreamanddraw.school, and they integrate black fine liners into their paintings. The way how they do it is really interesting. I did not do that here. I will leave the link to their account in the description below. Highly recommend to follow. One last thing when it comes to painting of the flower, I used metallic watercolors and I created dots in the middle of the top flower. If you don't have metallic watercolors, you can use a darker yellow or you can just use the black fine liner. After everything was dry, I used my scissors and fussy cut the painted images. It does take some time. This is not a quick cut, but since I was working in sections, meaning I first painted, then drew the lines, and then I cut out all the images, it was going much quicker. This is especially helpful if you decide to make multiple cuts. I cut the rest of the images off camera, and now let's work on the cut. To figure out the placement of the poinsettia, I first stamped the greeting. You could also write it by hand, but I bought this Merry Christmas stamp and I wanted to use it. I stamped it with a black ink, and here I'm using the House of Card and Paper cardstock. As I said, you could also use a Nina Solar White or stamp directly onto your card base. This following step is optional. I will add chapters in the video and you can just skip to the part where I'm assembling the poinsettia and follow from there. As I mentioned at the beginning, I struggled painting the greenery and additional things behind the poinsettia. I found it difficult to paint the foliage so it looks like it's coming from behind the poinsettia. So I thought I will just paint them on the background. First, I put all the leaves of the poinsettia together as I want them to be at the end, not adhering them yet. And using my pencil, I drew a few lines where I want the extra foliage to be, going from behind the leaves upwards. This is actually why I stamped the greeting first, so I can see where to draw. After I decided on the placement, I removed the poinsettia and extended few lines inwards because I wanted the foliage look like it's going from behind of the poinsettia. Some of the lines I also erased and redrew because it looked a little bit weird. Once I was happy, I brought back my watercolor paints and painted fir tree branches and branches with red berries. I started with a brown line. Especially for the berries, you don't really need the brown line, as I will be outlining them with a black pen anyway. For the fir tree branches, it helps with the placement of the needles, but you can also use a brown pencil or paint along the pencil line. I was using as little water as possible, as this is not a watercolor cardstock. If you have, you could use color pencils and make this as a mixed media kind of a thing. The fir tree branches I painted the same way as I did on the card 3 videos ago. I painted short strokes using light and dark shades of green. And the berries are just clusters of small circles. I also painted the brown branch, but as I said, this is not necessary. You can just draw it with the black fine liner. After I finished painting the berries and the fir tree branches, I decided to use the black fine liner on them as well. I drew a middle line on the fir tree branches along with a few short strokes over the needles. For the berries, I outlined the circles and I drew the branch. After I assembled the poinsettia, I decided to add one more fir tree branch at the top as it looked a little bit empty. The painting is done, and now let's assemble the poinsettia. First, I played a bit with the positioning of the leaves so it looks cohesive, and then I started adhering. I used liquid glue and applied it at the bottom of the petal. This part was a little bit fiddly. I adhered 1 or 2 leaves first, and then I had to refigure the placement of the additional leaves. It will look a little bit messy, but here what needs to look good are the parts that are going to be visible. The middle part, the bottom of the leaves, is going to be covered anyway with the leaves of the top of the poinsettia. You can use as many leaves as you want. Originally, I thought I will use only 3 of the green leaves, but as I was playing with it, I decided to add 1 more. Once all of the background leaves were adhered, I attached the top leaves. Here I used a double-sided foam tape so it's a little bit raised. Another optional step I just could not resist, I added splatter. The metallic paint I'm using here is bronze. You could obviously leave it out, it looks great without it, and as I said, you could also leave out the extra foliage. Also, you could change up the placement. For example, you could place the poinsettia in the center of the card. I used a white card base, and this time I used double-sided foam tape to adhere the piece. I tend to use liquid glue, especially when I'm using watercolor cardstock and a lot of water. I find it holds better. And even though I was using full A6 panel on A6 card base, I still had to trim it a bit by 1 mm as there was a slight overhang. Here is the finished card. It was really fun to make. You can see that the layered images create dimension and it really enhances the look. I hope I was able to inspire you and you will create something similar. If you enjoyed this video, give it a like and subscribe if you haven't done so already. And if you would like to see more Christmas cards with poinsettias, I have 2 ideas for you. One with a background filled with poinsettias, and the other one with a simple poinsettia painting, which was one of my first paintings I've ever done. Thank you all so much for watching, and I will see you in my next video.